Welcome to Keep the Game Beautiful podcast. Each week, I highlight incredible people who are doing amazing things in soccer, the beautiful game. I'm Anna Turi, your host. Thank you for listening. This past week, I was actually quarantined, which means I'm going to be spending the next 2 weeks in my house. Luckily, that does give some free time to work on the podcast and get some more episodes recorded, so we're ahead of schedule. Of course, I will be recording these episodes through Zoom. Today with Lynn, I really wanted to talk about how United Soccer Coaches supports coaches during COVID, how they've done it over the past few months, and how they're continuing this program. I did talk to both Ian and Vince earlier this year about the education programs, but not very much about the financial help program. I also wanted to talk to Lynn about her leadership and especially her leadership as a woman and the woman representation in the game. She gave some cool examples and great insight about how it's grown over the years and some situations she's been in where she's the only woman in the room. Lynn actually first reached out to me, which was very cool to have received an email from the CEO of United Soccer Coaches. She is such a great person and a great role model for many other young women like me. I hope you enjoy the episode. Today's guest is the CEO of United Soccer Coaches, Lynn Berling-Manuel. She has been in this position for 5 years and was a member on the board of directors for 14 years. Lynn has over 20 years of experience in leadership roles like this one. She has also served as the CEO of Soccer America, Chief Marketing Officer for AYSO. Lynn, I'm wondering if you'd like to add anything else or talk about what got you to where you are today.
Sure. I have kind of an unusual journey in soccer because I didn't play and I didn't coach. And I really came largely I come from a soccer family, and I largely came out of the business side of soccer. So that's what I've done for my entire career. It is more than 20 years. If I have to count, then it makes me sound too old. So 20 years sounds fine. But I actually started in the media side of things, and Soccer America today is all electronic. But for 40 years, it was a weekly national magazine. It was the largest weekly national publication for soccer in this country. So one of a little bit different for me as a woman in the game, I didn't come out of women's soccer particularly. I came out of the larger, it included women's soccer, certainly. But when I started, women's soccer was still pretty primitive. It was still early. Not many girls were playing. It's come a very, very long way. But for me, I covered the entire breadth of soccer from local to college to pro to international. So that was a really, really useful background for a lot of things. But I also ran the business of the magazine. I was CEO there for just about 20 years. And I led the effort to take it from print to digital. And that was a big move. It was a traumatic move, but it was a really great move also. And then about 15 years ago, I got a really unusual opportunity to go to AYSO. And lots of your listeners may not be so familiar with AYSO because it tends to be very heavily in the West, in California. That's where it began. But it is it's the American Youth Soccer Organization, and it's about 500,000 players. But what's different about it from a lot of the other soccer organizations is that they don't, they're all, I'm trying to think how to describe them. They're a single entity is how we refer to it. So it's one single organization, and it's all run centrally. So even though at that time, there were about 900 AYSO leagues around the country, they all ran out of the office in Torrance, California. So the opportunity to be chief marketing officer let me do some really fun things. So for example, for AYSO's 50th anniversary, we did a float in the Rose Parade, which was, it was the most, that probably of all the things I've done in my whole career, it was probably the hardest thing. I never had any idea what went into a float in the Rose Parade, and I don't know that I would ever do it again. But we had a lot of fun doing it. And we had big sponsors. We had Fox Sports, who came in as the jersey sponsor for AYSO at that time. So it was really interesting for me. And then when this opportunity came available 5 years ago, I really didn't plan to apply. I wasn't, even though I had been on the board for a long time as an outside director, I had, I wasn't a coach, and I was going to make me move from California, where I'm from, to Kansas City, Missouri, where that was all new. And it really took me a lot of thinking to decide if I wanted to do this. And in the end, it ended up being probably one of the greatest opportunities of my career. Moving to Kansas, see, I'd never actually lived in snow before. And I think that's actually, as soon as the leaves start to fall off the trees, I start to get worried, going, oh no, the snow is coming. And the gentleman who was CEO before me, he was from Boston. So he had to see 3 feet of snow before he would call a snow day. I need about 3 snowflakes. And then for me, that's a snow day. Okay, it's a snow day, I'm not driving. But it's been a great experience. And United Soccer Coaches, we've gotten to do some really creative and interesting things here. I have a great team. And our job, as we see it, is to serve and support soccer coaches. We're an association, a nonprofit association of coaches at all levels. We're the largest coaches association in the world for any sport. We have high school, youth, college, and professional. And our job is really to try and figure out how we can make their careers and their journey better through education, through services, and through a wide variety of support. So that's kind of been my path. It's just a little different than a lot of other people in soccer, but it's been a really good one for me. And I've been really, really lucky for all the things I've gotten to do.
So on this podcast, I always start with the same 3 questions. First, what does the beautiful game mean to you?
A lot of things on a personal level, but I still see, and it's a little bit of a cliche perhaps, but I still see soccer and truly it is the beautiful game as being the one true global language. It's the one thing you could take anywhere. You could take a soccer ball anywhere in the world and put it down and you will have friends. And regardless if you all speak different languages, at that moment in time, you will speak the same language. Our military, for example, has found that one of the best things to make friends when they're abroad is to play in local soccer teams and local soccer leagues. And although you know very well how ferocious it can be, the rivalries between country in soccer, I won't even speak about the other side, but in soccer, how ferocious those rivalries can be. But at the same time, soccer brings us together in a very unique way. And there is nothing else like that in the world. And for me, that is the most important thing.
What are actions or things you do to keep the game beautiful?
Ooh. Well, in this stage of my career, I am a very big fan of coaches. I believe that coaches are, I won't say the most important thing, because obviously at the end of the day, we're all here for the players. But what I hope I achieve and my goal and my role is to really ensure that coaches have the education, have the opportunity, have the support to make the game just as beautiful as it can be. And that includes really also thinking about it at a higher level of good sportsmanship and inclusion and all the other pieces that may not be wins and losses on the field, but I think they make our game very special. And I think other sports are learning from us what diversity can look like.
How do you encourage others to keep the game beautiful?
I've been really fortunate in this role because United Soccer Coaches we're an 80-year-old organization. It's been around for 8 decades. It's actually 2021 is the 80th anniversary, and the convention in 21 is the 80th convention. And I think that what we do and what I've been able to support is really looking at the core values of the game. And those are things like sportsmanship and appreciating differences and honoring your opponent, and a lot of factors that I think add to the total beauty of our game. I love the game on the field. We all do. And that's just fun in so many different ways. But our sport is very large in its reach and what it can accomplish. And if I add anything to that equation, I hope that really making a better soccer culture is what I add. We did a fun thing fun is not quite the right word, but I think a really important thing a few years ago, which we brought a large group of coaches together of all levels, recreational coaches, high-level club coaches, college coaches, high school, even professional coaches, for a day summit. And what we wanted to do was talk about what does it take to create a great soccer culture. And it was interesting because when we all got together, coaches looked at it at every level very similarly. It had to be fun, because whether you're a 6-year-old or you're a professional player, if it's not fun, you don't want to do it anymore. And coaches can have a lot to do with whether it's fun or not. But it also is diverse, and it has to support families, and it has to. So for me, it was really developing our commitment to culture as an association that I hope will be the legacy of making it as beautiful as it can be.
I had originally wanted to ask more about your background, but I think you actually covered that very well, and I'm sure we'll learn more about that as we go on.
Sure.
And you're such a big name, people can probably Google you and find a bunch out. So, talking about women representation in the game, how have you seen this grow over the years?
The first, and I'll talk about my organization for a moment. I'm not going to tell you my age because let's just say that's not a relevant issue. But I went to my very first coaches convention a long time ago. And the first coaches convention that I went to, I was the only woman who was there who was not a wife of one of the coaches. And I was very young, and I was very new in my role as a soccer editor. That's what had brought me to the convention. Fast forward a lot of years, our convention is now dramatic, very large numbers of women coaches at every level of the game. I think we are still, from my perspective, underrepresented and underappreciated sometimes in many elements of the game. And I think there's a lot of distance to go. But the fact that today on the participation level, on the playing level, we're almost 50-50 boys and girls. In high school, the same. College has 3 times the number of programs that men's soccer does. Our women's league is, the NWSL is important, but there's almost nobody on those teams right now who doesn't also have the second job of playing for the national team, who's barely making a living. They work hard, but they don't make very much money. And that's something that I think has to be resolved. So the upshot of it is lots of good things have happened, and we've come a long way, and women coaches are important, and women female players are important. I think we need a lot more women in the executive ranks. I'm the first female CEO at United Soccer Coaches. And I've, like a lot of women, just because it was a certain time, we've been the first in various jobs, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Women tend to move on to other opportunities because they don't necessarily see opportunities in the game. So from that perspective, I think we've come a long way, but we got a long way to go.
So you talk about being the only woman in the room, or the only woman that's not a wife of a coach. How can you cope with this and deal with this and be confident and strong in those situations?
Oh, I think there's a couple of things. One, honest to God, I've been very lucky too, as I've had lots of supportive men in my life, from a career perspective. But I think it's also a lot of self-talk that you have to remind yourself that you belong there. And it's easy. I don't know that it's more girls than boys, honestly, but I know for me personally, sometimes it's really easy for me to talk myself out of the idea that I belong there, and that it is intimidating. And on the other hand, I think you also have to, and I give this advice to my nieces and my friends, which is you have to own your power. You have to realize that you belong. You have to realize that you are equal. And whether they think you are or not is not relevant. It's whether you think you are. My first name, Lynn, Lynn, is a very common male spelling for the name Lynn. And early in my career, there were more times than I care to count where I would show up for a meeting or an event. And this was before FaceTime, and this was before Zoom. And I'd show up for an event and they would have no idea it was going to be a woman showing up in the room. And there were some very uncomfortable moments. And those were really an important experience for me, because I found what I had to do was project confidence. I had to project that I belonged. And quite honestly, sometimes people say, well, isn't that fake? And isn't that, but sometimes you sort of have to fake it till you make it. You have to act the part, even sometimes when you don't feel it. And I think players, you're a longtime player now. Sometimes you find that on the field. It's just as true in a meeting room or a boardroom or any other place. Men are fantastic and they have been very important to my career, but it's also very easy to have them talk over you or talk around you in the room, or you say something and the man next to you will say, well, what she's trying to say is, and those are things you have to kind of stop right in the moment. And you don't have to do it with anger, and you don't have to be rude, but you have to be clear, and you have to be firm, and you have to, even if you don't feel one iota of confidence about doing it, you kind of have to do it anyway. You get a good game face too, quite honestly. I've had my feelings hurt a lot sometimes, but my approach, and it's not everybody's approach, but my approach is to put that game face on and say, okay, I might have my feelings hurt here, but they're not going to know. And I'm going to just project as powerfully as I can and do my job. So might not work for everybody, but it's generally worked for me.
Yeah, I've taken a few education courses, and it's kind of weird being young, but also being female. And there was one that my dad and I went to, and there was this guy, he kept talking over me. And actually, one of my guests, Allie Lipsher, she stood up and she was very loud and passionate about it. And it was actually a very great moment and a great learning moment for me.
It is, it's funny because in many ways they don't, and again, I don't want to say they and make all men the same. That is not true ever. But maybe it's a good learning experience for us all, that when you're sort of quote unquote in the power position, because I could imagine it, I fear that sometimes people might say that I do it, is that when you're in the power position, it's easy to say, to not think as carefully about that other person as perhaps you should. And it's not necessarily bad intention. Oftentimes it's thoughtless. And sometimes you sort of have to pull people up. And which is what Allie did. You pull them up a little sharply and say, this is, you need to let her speak. And young is actually, I think, almost, I don't want to say it's more difficult than female, but young is tough because there's just an assumption somehow you don't know stuff. And I was very young when I started, not as young as you, so I'm very admiring, but I was pretty young. And that's really, that's almost tougher in some ways, because they're not taking you for what you are. They're taking you for what they think you are.
Yeah, I've gone into a lot of classrooms actually nervous because I don't know how people are going to treat me and if they're going to respect me as a coach and my opinions. But I actually have met some amazing people and some instructors that I've actually had on the podcast as well that have helped me through that experience.
It's important. And actually, you actually discovered, I think, the key to a lot of this, which is finding mentors, finding allies, and finding friends. And it is something that oftentimes women are not as good at as I wish they were, because having that circle around you, that positive, supportive circle around you, is something that is incredibly valuable for your entire career. No one makes it alone. No one. I mean, the most famous people on earth don't make it alone. You have to have that supportive group around you. And it's one of the places to really invest your time and your energy and your thought, because you become very similar. I don't want to say you become similar to the people around you, but if you gather positive people around you and supportive people around you, you're much more likely to be positive and supportive. If you bring around you people who are negative or critical or whatever, that's contagious. And sometimes you just have to edit people out of your life. You can do it great. You can't always do it when you're related to them, but nonetheless, you can do it graciously. It doesn't have to be mean or done in anger, but you have to recognize that I will be better off if I kind of edit this person out of my life a little bit.
We talk about mentors. Who were some of your mentors throughout your journey, and what was some of the best advice they gave you?
Ooh, I've been fortunate and had a lot. And one of them is a gentleman named Hank Steinbrecher. And Hank was at one time the Secretary General of U.S. Soccer, but I had known him for a very long time, going back to his coaching career. And I have at many points in my career gone to him. Within the last few years, I've gone to him a few times and said, I think this is the right thing to do, but I know it's going to make a lot of people mad. And I'm afraid. And his advice was always the same. No, it wasn't even advice. It was a question. Do you think it's the right thing to do? And if I said yes, then he said, you just have to do it. And I have found that to be true. 4 years ago, well, not quite that long, 3.5 years ago, after 77 years, we changed the name of this organization. It's called a rebrand. It had been the NSCAA, the National Soccer Coaches Association of America, for all those years. And there were a variety of things that were taking place that had really brought up the issue. Was it time to think about an identity that was broader and bigger and took us into the future, and included that notion of bringing coaches together, that included the idea of we are global, not just the US, but global. And I had our team did a tremendous amount of work to come up with a name and to come up with a story of how do we tell people about it. And I would say 2 or 3 days before we launched, I had a crisis of confidence, saying, what have I done? People are going to hate me and people I care about are going to be furious. And, what have I done? And I called Hank and said, what have I done? And what should I do? And I still have time to stop this. And in the end, he said, is it the right thing to do? And I said, yes. And we did it. So today we are United Soccer Coaches. And it was really the idea of coaches being united together. And that was really important to me. I think one of my sadnesses is that although I'm happy about it today, I didn't get some of my best female mentors until I was much older. And among those is a woman named Marcia McDermott. And Marcia is a famous female soccer coach. She was with the Carolina Courage. She was a college coach. Her last college coaching job, she was the head coach at West Point Army. And today, she was president. She's a past president of United Soccer Coaches. Today, she's an executive coach, as well as she's been a scout for the U.S. national team. She's just done all sorts of things. But she's one of those folks who, again, as a mentor, when I'm concerned about making good choices, or I just feel insecure, and I do at times, because I think everybody does. She's one of those people I can bounce it off of, and she'll never tell me what to do. She'll help me figure out how to think about it. And that's been an enormous amount of help to me. So those are a couple.
So we talk about that confidence that everyone struggles with and those insecurities that others struggle with. How have you struggled with that throughout your journey, and how do you cope with that, maybe only by yourself?
I don't know about everybody else, but I think it's really hard. I've done a lot of things. I've got a lot of experience. I've been fortunate. I've been very successful at a lot of different things. But each time I start something new, I usually start out with great confidence. And I think it's the right thing to do, and I get going, and it's all exciting. And then you start to hit moments along the way going, I'm not qualified to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. How am I doing this? Why am I doing this? How did I get into this? Am I crazy? And in some ways, when those moments happen, and they happen to us all, you kind of have to take that step back. You have to reach out to your friends and say, remind me why I'm smart. Just remind me. I know it's true, but just remind me. And in many ways, you take a deep breath and go back to this, am I doing the right thing? And you keep going. But it's hard. I mean, the first year I came to this job, I can honestly say it was one of the most interesting and enjoyable experiences, but very frightening. It was very frightening. I'd gotten myself into something very different than I'd ever done before. I moved to a new city with my husband. We left all of our friends and family behind. My husband ended up having a pretty serious illness right after we got here. And all of a sudden I felt, God, I've got a new job and a new city and a sick husband, and oh my God. And, in many ways, it was probably one of those moments where I really felt, my confidence got hit very hard, because a lot of that traditional network of friends and family was all of a sudden 1,000 miles away. And, you go back to the basics every time. You do. You remind yourself why you did something. You be good to yourself. You go out and you walk around the block a few times, and you breathe. And I do believe that's actually one of the most important things of all, is you sort of have to slow down and breathe deep and remind yourself that what's the worst that can happen. And one thing I have discovered in my career, and I have done what I think are some pretty bold things that had at least the opportunity to get lots of criticism. And in many ways, it is just breathing deep and keep going. And frankly, embarrassment doesn't kill you. Lots of things in life, the worst that can happen is you're going to be embarrassed. You're going to be embarrassed if you fail. I mean, I don't know about other people, but that's terrifying to me. If I fail at something, that's going to be so embarrassing. And I have determined that if that's the worst that's going to happen, do it. You live through embarrassment. If it's life or death, that's different. If it's, and you but if it's embarrassment, just keep going. You live through embarrassment, and you feel bad for a little while, and then it goes away.
So we talk about your leadership as well. How has this developed throughout your positions?
It's interesting, because I am, I don't want to say I'm struggling more today. I'm finding that my leadership style and capabilities change. And some of it is the world is changing. I am learning new leadership lessons today. One of probably the realities of much of my life, my career, and my leadership was I believed that even though I was very supportive of my employees and my staff and my colleagues, and I felt that people thought I was very kind and very helpful, I still tended to always kind of keep distance, a little bit of professional distance, and perhaps was not as personal as perhaps I could have been. And as I've gotten older, I am finding, as time has passed and times have changed, especially with younger employees, there needs to be a much more personal connection and a much more visible personal support and a real better connection, sort of emotion and heart. And that's been harder for me than I thought it would be. I tend to be protective of myself, and being able to be authentic and to be transparent and open. I'm learning today new things to make my leadership, I hope, more successful. So you don't stop learning ever. And I certainly have had the good fortune to have a lot of really great people I have worked with. And I have friends, my team at Soccer America, that's some of them we met 40 years ago. We're still very close friends, and I think of them as family. And it's a learning experience your whole life. You always are learning how to be a better leader.
What leadership qualities do you think made you the most successful, and how do you try to help others with these leadership qualities?
Now that's an interesting question. One of the things I like to think I'm good at, and I think it's been very helpful for me, is being able to, in my mind, put myself in the other person's shoes. I don't know that you would think of that off the top as leadership, but I think it's one of those things that whether it's somebody I'm negotiating with, whether it's an employee, whether it's somebody I'm selling a product to, whether it's an organization that we're addressing and trying to make changes, what I try and do always is say, okay, I know how I think about this, but how do they think about this? What's important to them? And I always try and assume, it's not always a fact, but I try and assume the other person is actually coming from a positive place too. They're not just trying to be a jerk, even though I might feel that way in the moment. And my job, to a degree, is to put myself in their shoes and understand their position. And the more I can do that, almost always, the more successful I will be. And I try and teach others to do that as well.
Moving on a little bit, how has United Soccer Coaches helped coaches during COVID times?
Whew. There's never been anything like this, that's for sure. 2 or 3 things we've done. What we did right in the beginning and have continued to do was become a resource hub for coaches. We created a resource section in our website that it wasn't just, soccer information. It was how do you apply for unemployment, or how do you find other kinds of work if all of a sudden as a coach you're unemployed, because that's what we saw right in the beginning. If kids don't play, coaches don't work. And certainly many of our coaches are volunteer or part-time and have other jobs, but many coaches are full-time at this. And all of a sudden their livelihood was gone. So for us, it was really trying to gather. We didn't see ourselves as the experts. We felt that the better path was to find information from across the country, around the world, from every avenue, and bring those really quality links together into a central place. So a coach could go to one page and find out how to apply for unemployment, how to work with their kids over Zoom, how to negotiate with their club, all of those things in one place. That was very important to us. But what we've also done, and I'm very proud of it, we have a United Soccer Coaches Foundation, and the foundation did a shift in how it usually does grant making for each year for coaching courses and things like that. This year, they they didn't do any of that for this year. They brought it all together and said, we know coaches are having a hard financial time. Let us pay for their dues. Let us pay for the United Soccer Coaches dues, because we realize they may not be able to. And we have been able to pay for several hundred people, or at least assist them in terms of paying for their United Soccer Coaches dues, which I really thought was an important thing to do, because we also made content free for we created a 30-day sort of trial or an introductory membership. And it was really and it was free, but we were getting people saying, I'm probably not right for United Soccer Coaches, but I've got time on my hands and I'd like to learn. And so we made the decision to make as much free content and information. We do dozens of online courses and a pretty vast online resource library of videos and lesson plans and magazine art. All sorts. It's got over 1,000 pieces in it, and they're all for our members. But we decided during this period, especially in the beginning, let's make what we have available to those who need it. So that's the approach we've largely taken.
I actually talked to Vince and Ian earlier this year about United Soccer Coaches and the education during COVID. Mm-hmm. Do you see any shifts to the education and the way you will serve members after the pandemic?
We've talked about it a lot, because yes, there's been an enormous shift. United Soccer Coaches, education is part of our mission. As part of one of our core values. We do education at every level, from the highest level to all the way to coach education for moms and dads. But very quickly, we realized that all of that traditional in-person education couldn't happen. And what would we do? And Ian Barker is our Director of Coaching Education, and Vince Gansberg is our manager who oversees all of our internet content and coordinates all of that. And what they did was they took some of the time that became available to them, because they were not doing in-person courses, and they reimagined our courses as blended courses. So they are online, they are components that are through Zoom, but also components that are strictly work that one of the candidates has to do. We've been able to bring the candidate groups together over Zoom. So we were able to use the technology that's available, and they were really creative about it. And we've gotten rave reviews about it. And it's made us realize we will always do in-person education, because for many of us, it's still probably our best way to learn. But the entire coaching community, just like everyone else, is getting used to being able to get that kind of education online. So that's what we've done. And I think we'll continue to do that long after COVID is over.
I know just after convention last year, we really started to hear about COVID. And I know the convention is a major event for coaches to connect to so many people. So could you talk about the decision to go online for this next convention?
Sure. We thought we had just lucked out, because we had finished the January 20 convention on January 20th. And the first COVID case was identified in Washington on January 21st. So at convention, it wasn't a thing yet. Within days, it was a thing. And then March 16th, our entire office went to working from home, and we haven't been back since. So it was an enormous change. But honestly, I think we still all believed that we would have an in-person convention. It was supposed to be this coming January in Anaheim. We were looking forward to the palm trees and the sun and California in January. And then it became very clear that that was not going to happen. It was just not safe. It wasn't safe for our coaches. It wasn't safe for exhibitors. It wasn't safe for anybody. So we made the decision to cancel, which was a very dramatic decision for us. It's the first convention that has not occurred in person in 80 years. And I was the CEO who was going to decide that. Again, kind of a scary decision. But what we have done is we are holding a digital convention. And frankly, we've become very excited about it. It is going to be different, but it is going to be really expansive and unique. What we had to ensure is it wasn't just a bunch of Zoom calls. It had to be meaningful. It had to be have the networking, and it had to have all of the other features of an in-person convention. And we're actually going to have a live studio in Kansas City that will be the host and the hub. And then we are bringing speakers in from all over the world and all over the country to present via Zoom, but it will be hosted by live hosts inside our studio. Dee Linke, who does the United Soccer Coaches podcast, will be our primary MC. But we put out our social schedule the other day. There will be receptions. There will be, I shouldn't say it to you, but hanging out at the bar is a big deal for a lot of folks at the convention, and that's not an option this time around, but they're having virtual happy hours and virtual meetings, not meetings, but again, social things. Our advocacy groups are holding their hospitality hours to get together and be able to say hi and meet each other. We have a grand digital exhibit hall that is being sponsored by Verizon, and we expect over 100 exhibitors to take out virtual booths where you can chat with in real time with the folks in the booth. There'll be demonstrations of the various products that they have. We'll have, a wide variety of programming of panels and lectures and field sessions and, all of the things that we do at a traditional convention, but in a new way. It'll be different, but it also has some unique advantages. It's expensive to come to convention. The registration is certainly, it's not the biggest expense. The expense is travel and hotels and meals and all those sorts of things. So that's gone. This is a convention that all in is under $200. And that includes recordings of every session that will be available to you for a whole year. And we think it opens up a lot of new opportunities for folks who couldn't come before. We have, 1,000 Texas high school coaches, for example, who have never been able to come because they play at that time of year. And they've said, well, at last, you've done it for us. So it'll be different. It'll be a lot different, but we're excited about it. Then in 2022, we're back with an in-person convention, and we'll actually be in Kansas City. So everybody will have to come to Kansas City is literally the middle of the country. I mean, dead the middle of the country. And so we look forward to that still.
I'm all signed up for Podcast Row. So what should I expect this year?
Oof. It'll be different. Just to describe Podcast Row to folks is that at our convention, we've invited in a number of the soccer podcasts from around the country, including Anna's, and feature them sort of in the general area so that, celebrities and attendees can chat on the podcasts. And they've been very, very popular, both for the podcast and for our attendees. So this year we are indeed trying to do it virtually, and we will have each of them you will have one of our virtual booths so that people can sign up and they can come visit you, and you can broadcast, and you can let people know when specific interviews will be and that sort of thing. So I can't tell you that I'm as good as painting a picture of it as some of my colleagues are, but they tell me it's going to be really cool and really fun.
So I think we've made it to our final question. I have this question that I ask every guest. What do you hope people remember about your impact to soccer and the world?
Ooh. I hope that they remember that I really cared and that I was really passionate about it. And that for the good things that I do, I mean, as time goes by for many of us, and I see this with lots of soccer people as they get older and they kind of fade out of the game, they feel forgotten. And in some ways, I'm I don't want to say I'm okay with that, but I'm it's really important to me that people remember that whatever I did with passion, and whatever I did, I was really committed to, and that there were no strings attached. I didn't do it because I wanted to be famous. I didn't do it because I wanted people to remember me in the future. I did it because I cared. And I did it because it was what I love to do. So I'm hoping that people will remember that.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate you including me.
I'll go ahead. One of my favorite moments while talking to Lynn was learning about the woman representation in the classroom and learning about her personal experiences and some of the experiences I gave. I like learning about the other difficulties that women have faced in the classroom because I know that would have been much more helpful to me going into my first classroom experience. And I did know a little bit, but not what I know now, and how it would be hard and difficult, especially being young as well. It was also fun to learn about what convention will look like this year. It is going to be different, but I hope this gives everyone an experience to get educated and to be able to participate in the convention. And also stay tuned for a podcast for this year. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and until next time, remember to keep the game beautiful.